posterity and to share afterwards. So I'd just like to welcome everybody today. Really pleased that people have come and that I've been able to, Brian Emmott, for a trustee of Housing People Building Communities, has really put together this event to be included in the Breaking Ground Festival. Just to give you a bit of information, Breaking Ground is the new community-led housing hub for the Liverpool City region, which we launched on Saturday. And the aim of the hub is to promote all aspects of community-led housing across our region, and then to provide some specialised advice and support to enable groups to develop their projects and get them off the ground. So we've had a real smorgasbord of activity this week, highlighting all sorts of different approaches to community-led housing, which are so vibrant right now in the UK. And I'm just really thrilled to have Housing People Building Communities involved in this session today, and what you've put together, and to have Richard here today as well. It's fantastic. Personally, I just want to thank Brian and Lisa for the support that you've given the hub, and you've been very, very consistent and really helpful through this whole process. I started on April the 1st in my dining room. I've moved into my living room, but just knowing that Brian and you've been there, it's been really important for me. So thank you very much. I'm now going to hand over to Shannon Ledbetter, who is the founder and chair of Housing People Building Communities, who is going to take us through today's session. So over to you, Shannon, and welcome.
Oh, thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here on this wonderful sunny day. Spring is on its way. And I must say that on days like this, it's a good day for building. So I'm extremely excited about the prospect of coming together to build on our next project. I'm grateful to you, Paul, for the opportunity to share with you the HPBC story so far. And I also want to thank Liza and Brian, who will be joining me in the presentation. We'll move on to the first slide.
Does Liza have to do that?
So apology.
Technical hitch.
Very Liza Parry, co-host. Oh, there we go.
Doesn't Liza have to move it forward because it's your screen?
But have you? I apologize for this. It says co-host on the participants, but there's no make host. Have you made me the host?
I've made you the host, but because it's Lisa's screen, I think Lisa's got to move it on the presentation.
Yes, she does. She does, but I thought I had to make her host.
No, I've already made her a co-host.
Okay, so she can move it on without that. That's great.
So have you got the presentation on the screen now?
Yeah, can you not see it, Lisa?
I can, yeah.
Yeah, everybody can see that.
Can everybody else see it?
Yes, yes.
All right, okay.
Yes.
Oh dear. Well, yeah. Again, thanks, Paul, for arranging all these events and this launch this week. I'm Liza Parry. I'm the Chief Exec of Housing People Building Communities, and there's going to be Shannon and Brian who are going to contribute to the presentation, hopefully with fewer hitches as we go forward, and Richard's here to join us. So Shannon is the founder and chair of HPBC. Brian, a trustee. Oh, here we go. And Richard's going to talk about the Self-Build and Custom House Building Act that he orchestrated. So we're aiming for there to be around a 30-minute question and answer session at the end. Without further ado, I'm going to hand you back over to Shannon to talk a little bit about the background.
And I look exactly like that, even though that picture was taken about 15 years ago. Thank you very much, Liza. And I want to emphasize that when people come to site, they always have to have their picture taken with a huge stuffed animal.
Oh.
When the charity was created with a vision to build loving and supportive communities and homes that are affordable and accessible to those in housing need. Our unique model, which utilizes sweat equity, enabled our home partners to build their own homes and those of their neighbors. And there was a vision of building a diverse community, thereby proving that people from different backgrounds can live side by side. So we've got the charity, in the slide, we have a number of photographs of the volunteers, home partners, and it talks about how we launched in 2002 as an affiliate of the international housing charity Habitat for Humanity. And our first development was nine 3-bedroom homes on land that was generously gifted to us by the Roman Catholic Archdiocese, who felt that it was important with a church, with a community that was no longer primarily Catholic coming to church, to be able to do outreach and improve the quality of life for the whole parish and community, which is very diverse. And that those first 9 homes were built with a large grant from HMRI. And then when we completed those homes and successfully, we worked in partnership with Sanctuary Housing, because HMRI had dried up, finished, which a lot of house builders felt, and some no longer were able to continue. But we were lucky enough that we established a partnership with a housing association, and we had wonderful support from Liverpool City Council and the Army, who helped us. And we then went on to build 23 3-bedroom homes, which we'll hear more about. HMRI is Housing Market Renewal Initiative, which was a public grant body for housing, primarily back in the 90s. So Housing People Building Communities' ultimate aim is to improve the quality of life by unlocking human potential, empowering people to work and succeed together by the building of affordable homes and creation of strong and cohesive communities. And we do this by a unique model, and one which we find creates the most value and pride in the built environment and in the communities themselves. So our sweat equity is where the home partners put in 500 hours alongside family and friends to build their own homes and those of their neighbors. It enables them to take a special pride in their home because they've built it, and it's that in of their neighbors, and it creates community because the home partners are working on their own house and those of their neighbors from the very beginning. And it's a really wonderful way of creating a support system and a loving community. We also have to date only sold the homes on a shared ownership basis. Now, the shared ownership affordability is quite exciting. The way that our model works is that, for example, in Liverpool, the average 3-bedroom house that is rented in the private sector is £730 per calendar month. And a lot of these homes, as we know, provide poor living conditions and aren't energy efficient. So the running costs are high, and they don't offer security and no sense of belonging or community. So based on £125,000 for a HPBC home, the figures are really significant for the savings for shared ownership. And for example, if the home partner buys 50% of the mortgage, and the typical repayment mortgage over 25 years is £226 plus a 2.75% rent on the retained equity is £144. The total cost is £370 a month. So in comparison with 730 is quite significant, and is also enables the home partner to have a home that they own. And the additional £10,000 that the 500 hours of sweat equity for the deposit adds an added incentive, and one in which the home partner is then able to access that mortgage. And all of our home partners have been living in rented accommodation, and either private or registered social landlords, or some of them have been still living with their parents. And the common feature was that despite the government, various government affordable housing and shared equity schemes, none of them were able to buy homes without the additional assistance of sweat equity, which provided the deposit for their homes. And so that sweat equity model is not only is it community building and creates that sense of pride and extra ownership, but it also enables people to get onto the housing ladder that wouldn't otherwise be able to. The diversity is a really important part of our mission statement and our aims. When the charity was first gifted the land in Toxteth, Granby Toxteth is one of the most diverse areas in all of the country, and it was really important to show that people could not only work together but live side by side, creating a supportive and loving community and in peace. And with the world being the way that it is, it's a really excellent model of how people are willing to work together and live together peaceably. And as a sort of anecdote, when we first broke ground, we had the patrons who were Gideon Bentoven, who was a local councillor at the time, Lord David Alton, who is a prominent Roman Catholic, and Akbar Ali, MBE, to plant an olive tree on the site to show that what we were trying to do is break down barriers and bring people together, which has been really exciting. And we also have diversity, not just in cultures, but ages and sexuality, etc. The cooperation is amazing, and that's actually a fundamental foundation of the charity, in that we want to engage with as many volunteers, universities, local colleges, different partners, and people from all sectors of society. And it's really exciting because everyone is working towards a common goal, that to enable home ownership and and break down barriers and build relationships. And there'll be more about CSR, but that's part of the whole cooperation and partnership. And so I'll now hand over to our amazing chief executive
I'm not
who's on the
sure about
ground,
that.
who helps to make it all happen on the ground, and does a fantastic job. So thank you very much, Liza.
Okay, so just to give a bit more detail then, the project in Liverpool was sort of split into 3 phases. There was the initial building of the 9 homes on Kingsley Road, which Shannon mentioned. In terms of the house type, there were 3-bed timber framed houses. The main partners involved were HMRI and Habitat for Humanity. Financial model, we were grant funded, and had a significant amount of corporate support and volunteer support. I think just Kingsley Road, the 9 houses had been completed actually before I became involved with HPBC, but it's fair to say that there was exceptional support from Liverpool City Council, which we were extremely grateful for, and that was really at quite a practical level, not so much in a financial way, but the practical support that they gave, and the project won a number of regional housing awards, which were really recognising the community engagement, the regeneration, and the affordability aspect of the work that the charity was doing. The second phase was the building of the 23 homes on Alt Street, and that was the point where I got involved with the charity. Shannon mentioned the HMRI funding had come to an end, and the charity had planning permission to build these additional 23 homes, but we're struggling to find the financial support, and we ended up partnering with initially Cosmopolitan Housing, who then got taken over by Chester and District Housing, who then got taken over by Sanctuary Housing. I think it's fair to say that those takeovers did have an impact and cause delays really with the building of the 23 homes. But Homes England, or what was it called prior to Homes England grant funding? But Homes England grant funding was accessed, and we received a lot of corporate support, and I think it's probably fair to say that a really strong community developed despite the delays. And, you know, just a few examples really. You know, the home partners set up their own Facebook page, which is still extremely active. The parents with young children set up their own coffee morning group, taking it in turns to host in their own homes. And the home partners organised a number of street parties, including after the Manchester bombing, arena bombing, the Muslim home partners asked if they could throw an Eid street party as a thank you to the other members of the community who had supported them and made them feel sort of very safe during a time when actually in the wider community they weren't feeling very safe at all. So I mean, you know, there's a lot of examples really of how strong the community is as a result of them all working together to build their own houses through the sweat equity model. And I think for me, one of the most heartwarming sights is you walk down Old Street. It's a cul-de-sac. It's in the middle of Toxteth, and there's bikes and scooters strewn in the front gardens. And I'm not sure that there's many areas, and certainly where I live, where I would feel that leaving bikes and scooters in the front garden would be safe. But I think it shows you the community spirit that's there and how they all sort of look out for one another. Well, and a quote from Richard, who's going to be joining us later. I think I'm just going to read a little bit more of the quote from the home partner, Hannah. She actually said, I'd like to share more of my thoughts. There's a Tom Waits song that goes like this. What makes a house grand? Oh, it ain't the roof or the doors. If there's love in a house, it's a palace for sure. These houses have hundreds of hours of love built into each one. In the stud walls that my husband and father-in-law installed in the house down the street. In the strokes of paint in my house that my neighbour's family painted. In the sidings that a group of us spent a very cold and rainy November day putting up. Hundreds of hours of people showing up and grafting to build this community. If love makes the house a palace, we live on Millionaires Row. Life in a HPBC house is probably much the same as life in most other houses. There's still chores, still a list of jobs you need to get round to, and all the laughter and tears everyone has. But every now and again, when the sunlight hits the street in a certain way, I stop and remember what it took to get us all here, and I feel grateful and blessed. I think that sort of sums up the feelings. Just on to the final phase, really, and that was the St. Bernard's refurbishment. After we'd completed the 32 homes on Kingsley Rd and Old Street, the Archdiocese gifted us the St. Bernard's Church. Again, you know, there were a number of partners involved. With this phase, we actually partnered with Onward Housing, and again, Homes England grant funding was accessed. We had a lot of corporate and volunteer support. And And again, the development of a strong community integrated with the Kingsley Road, Old Street community and the wider community was of paramount importance. We held team builds for the home partners and family and friends every other Saturday during the 18 months of the build period. Local neighbours were involved, and home partners who weren't actually working on the site came along, brought food at lunchtime, brought the kids along. What was interesting was that actually there were a number of home partners who completed their sweat equity hours before the completion of the project, and they actually volunteered to continue doing sweat equity hours, which they donated to their neighbours, which was a lovely thing to do, and again a sign that the community was forming before they'd even moved in to the houses. So just a couple of examples really of how the working together created that strong community. It was interesting that within the first couple of weeks of them all moving into the homes, I was hearing about the kids who were having sleepovers at each other's houses because they got to know each other during the team builds. They were sharing the responsibilities for the school runs, and loads of examples really of the strong community that had been formed. St Bernard's was completed in 2019. And I'm going to hand over to Brian now, who's going to just talk a little bit more about the diversity and the makeup of the home.
Okay, fine. Thanks, Lisa. This slide, I'll let you sort of look through it. It's highlighting the various statistics of our community and show the wide variety of home partners that we have, the number of homes people house, adult and children ages, their status, religion, nationalities. And you can see how diverse the whole thing is. So I think you'll agree that's an impressive community that we have created. And all people previously living or had family connections in the Liverpool 8 district. So very much a local community. And none of them would have been able to obtain a home without the ability to work the sweat equity to provide the initial deposit that then allowed them to go forward to apply for a mortgage. But there are several other statistics that I want to share with you that highlight the areas that we've had a lot of help from. A lot of them, as Lisa went through, were touched upon as the different phases of the system, but I'd like to give some of that more information. That it helped us to keep the whole project going, and without their generosity and their support, we wouldn't have been able to keep the cost of build down to the affordable levels that we did, that then allowed people to do the sweat equity and apply for the mortgage and the shared ownership at the level that they did. One of the initial benefits we had was from a company called Ainsley Goman, who provided the basis, the architectural design that enabled us to go forward to planning permission and show what would be possible on the site. Once, and we mentioned the Old Street site, that it needed an awful lot of clearing up before we could start to build houses there. And the Army, through the military aid to civilian communities system, came on site and over a weekend or an extended weekend cleared something in the region of over 200 lorry loads of soil, rubble or whatever that allowed the site to be basically flattened to allow the development of the housing there. They then came back and virtually lived on site for a week or more and did all the layout of the roads and the various drainage that was required. So a tremendous amount of voluntary and free help that we received from the Army. We also received an awful lot of help from a company you may not have heard particularly called Wienerberger. It's an Austrian-based company, and they are actually the largest brick builders in the world. But through their UK organisation, they have been consistently for all of the projects, providing us with paving, tiles, and all of this enabled us to be able to work with the contractor, who'd obviously built cost into that for these particular items, to donate them, so that then the charity got really the compensation of the value of those from the contractor, so that again that enabled us to keep the cost of build down to a desirable and affordable level. We also received donations from the Whirlpool company, donated white goods for most of the houses, a company called Beast for donating radiators, Mersey Forest for donating trees for the landscaping of the final estate. So there were many, many more that helped. So you can see along the way, a lot of help and donations that were given to us enabled us to take the project forward, but to keep the cost down to the bare minimum. We had a lot of help from companies ISG, Bersk, Civils and Hayrod for construction, civil engineering and structural advice and support. And also I would like to mention, and this is a help that could help a lot of companies, that Business in the Community, which is a Prince Charles charity, second people from their members to projects. We have examples of people that a project needed some help with the finances. So one of the banks might second somebody for a week, 2 weeks, a month, whatever, or a day a week or something to help the charity with those. It's not been as practical, obviously, during the last year or so with COVID, but I'm sure this is something that will pick up again once everything starts to get back to near normal. So all of these they've helped us considerably in supporting the charity and enable the cost of build to be kept to a minimum. And this obviously reduced the home partners' required levels of mortgages. We also had considerable help from volunteers throughout the 3 sites. Again, without whose help, we'd not been able to keep the costs low. Now, some of those volunteers I'd like to just mention were Hubert College. They provided a lot of the carpentry and the general site experience, and that included building and installing most of the staircases in the homes, all done under the college expert tuition and supervision. So again, we got things made and developed for us at no cost to the charity. We had a lot of help from the universities, John Moores and the University of Liverpool, for help with the built environment advice, energy efficiency advice. Engineering and architectural students were sometimes volunteered and seconded to the project. We also had international help from La Rochelle College and l'École Paris Engineering School in France for sending secondments over, often for several weeks, to live in Liverpool as part of their international training that they then worked on site and worked in with all the home partners on the sweat equity and the like. It was mentioned a little bit in one of the slides of Lisa's about company bonding, team build. Quite regularly on a Saturday, Lisa particularly would be organising these, and local companies like Hill Dickinson, Onward Housing, Serco, Bank of America would arrange a team build that would bring a lot of their employees along to bond, to work together, and work alongside the home partners in developing their sweat equity. So again, we got compensation, we got funding coming in from those companies for the team buildings that we were able to put together. So hopefully we had thousands and literally thousands of other volunteers, both local, national and international, that helped over the life of the 3 projects. So hopefully all of this helps to show that the community-led housing is not just about the project and the community and the actual communities that are housed, but the wider community, local and national, that willingly provide help and support to enable those in need of affordable housing to obtain their own homes. And it allows us as the charity to take great pride when handing over the keys to our home partners. So hopefully that gives a broader range of, we didn't want to put too many statistics up on the screen that it can become boring, but just to show you the range and the help that the charity has received from a wide variety of people that help people to gain their own homes. Thank you, Lisa.
Just to finish off then, obviously we've completed our work in that area of Liverpool. We hope to be back working in the Liverpool City region area in the future. But our next project, which we've already started work on, is in Wigan, in Greater Manchester. Again, it's a church, presbytery and land that has been gifted to us by the Roman Catholic Archdiocese. It's very similar in design to St. Bernard's, and we're looking to build 24 homes, 11 within the church, 3 apartments within the presbytery, and some new builds on the land that's adjacent to the church. It's obviously a new geographical area for us, and no doubt will be a challenge. But we've always had a strong belief that this model can be replicated outside of Liverpool. So watch this space. The local engagement has been a priority for us from the outset, and we're currently working closely with Wigan Council, the Wigan Armed Forces HQ, and the parish priests, ex-parishioners, local community. And I think what's important to say is that forming strong partnerships really has been critical to our achievement in building the 48 homes in Liverpool, and also in our plans for the 24 affordable home development in Wigan. And before handing over to Shannon and Richard, I'd just like to add that HPBC was committed to supporting the Liverpool hub from the outset, but we've also had first-hand experience of the value of these hubs, with the support that we've had from the Greater Manchester regional hub in the Wigan area. Tom has introduced us to, in fact, he introduced us to key people at Wigan Council and numerous other organisations. So, I mean, you know, we've been on the receiving end of the value really of what the hubs can offer. So I'm going to now hand over to Shannon, who will introduce Richard.
Our friend. It's my great pleasure and privilege to introduce Richard Bacon, Member of Parliament for South Norfolk. He is a fantastic champion for community-led housing and has been a great support for our own charity. And we're all very lucky to have him fighting our corner for community-led housing. And I would just like to say thank you to Richard for all of his support over the years. And I hope that we can continue to receive that support. And I look forward to hearing the your story as to what's happened since the Act of Parliament that you were the architect of.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Can you hear me? Thumbs up if you can hear me.
Yep.
Good, excellent. Thank you for inviting me. It's now many years since I first met Shannon. I was organising a meeting in the House of Commons after I came high up in the ballot for private members' bills with Kevin MacLeod off the telly from Grand Designs. And I managed to get both the Housing Minister at the time and the Shadow Housing Minister at the time to attend and to endorse the idea of my bill. And the idea of my bill was to make it easier for anybody to get a hold of a piece of land and to get planning permission to build a house. And I suppose the reason I started getting interested in housing, it goes back a long way. And I lived in London in the early 1980s where I was a student. And it was very obvious there was a lot of derelict housing. There were a lot of people sleeping rough. And it's fair to say that over the last 30 to 40 years, perhaps even more, the housing system has started to work as a whole, I think, less well. If you go back to the early 70s, 1971, a school teacher on one income, earning a salary of £1,500 a year, could buy an average priced house for just over £5,000. It's no longer the case that a school teacher on one income could buy an average priced house. There's been a disequilibrium that's grown and grown, so that instead of it being on average 3 to 4 times average salary to buy the average house, it's now 7 or 8 or 9 times average income to buy the average house, and in certain parts of the country, much more than that. In the hot London boroughs, of course, even more, but also in big cities like Birmingham and Manchester, the ratio has changed. It's become more and more difficult. And it's perfectly obvious that the housing system doesn't work as it should. The supply of housing doesn't rise to meet the demand. Otherwise, the amount of housing relative to the people who need it would stay more or less constant. Now, there are a lot of reasons for that, and in my experience with most complex problems, there's enough blame to go round. One of the things that, of course, gets mentioned a lot is the decision of Mrs. Thatcher to sell off all the council houses. And there's undoubtedly some truth in that. I think probably the most important aspect of that was the failure to use the capital receipts, the money that came from those sales, back into more housing. But there are lots of other guilty parties as well. The nature of the planning system and how it's become more and more complicated. The way in which our house builder market has been concentrated over a smaller and smaller number of firms, so that as recently as 1988, small and medium-sized builders, little local house builders, built 2/3 of all houses. And that's now probably more like 20% built by small builders, and something like 80% built by a very small number of extremely large companies who produce the same product everywhere, all across the country. And another interesting fact is that 2/3 of people would prefer not to buy those dwellings from the volume house builders. Only 1/3 of people in surveys done by the volume house builders themselves say that they would prefer to buy that product. And so I've always believed that there ought to be more opportunity for the people who need housing to have more say, to have more voice, to have more power. Brian mentioned the Prince of Wales earlier. There was an architect, famous architect called Rod Hackney, who used to advise the Prince of Wales, who said many years ago, I think in a book, it is a dangerous thing to underestimate human potential and the energy which can be generated when people are given the opportunity to help themselves. And I've always fundamentally believed that that's true. We have therefore to create, if it is true, the environment in which they do have the opportunity to help themselves. And what's great about housing people, building communities, is it shows what energy can be unleashed when people are given those opportunities. And my simple contention is, if it were much easier to do it, if it were much easier to avail oneself of those opportunities, more people would. So when I came high up in the private members' ballot, I introduced a bill called the Self-Build and Custom House Building Bill. It's now the Act of Parliament, Self-Build and Custom House Building Act 2015. And what it does, it's very simple. All it does is require local councils to keep a register of people who would like to get a piece of land and build a house, and then give enough suitable planning permissions to meet the demand on that register. Now, there's a lot that I'd like to have done that I wasn't able to get into the bill, but the government then strengthened it the following year and added another provision, which was that essentially the number of people on the register didn't just sit there. The bit that I've just mentioned came in the strengthening in 2016 in the Housing and Planning Act, whereby the number of people on the register ratcheted it up. If the number of people on the register grew, the legal obligation on the council to provide more planning permissions also grew. And quite a few councils around the country have really taken this and run with it. And there are quite a lot of them in the north of England, in Blackpool, Calderdale, Carlisle, Durham, Kirklees, Wakefield, as well as elsewhere in the country, Kings Lynn here in Norfolk, South Gloucestershire, Charwell in Oxfordshire, and elsewhere. There are some councils who are doing their best to thwart it, and I've been doing my best through the Right to Build task force, which I've been working with, to make sure that government is aware of those councils who are trying to make it difficult by charging fees, in some cases punitive fees, simply to be on the register. But what's happened recently in the last few months, since October, has sped up the work that we've been doing over the last 6 or 7 years very considerably. On the 30th of October, the Housing Secretary, Robert Jenrick, announced that there would be a review to make the legislation work more smoothly, to make it easier for people who want to build their own house. The government is very strongly committed to the idea of people being able to do that. And then on the 25th of November, the Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, announced up to £100 million, a significant proportion of which, it's now been said by the housing industry, will go into self-build and custom house building. Now, this is tenure blind. It can be for people who want to buy a piece of land and do their own thing privately, but that's by no means all of what it's about. It can be used for housing cooperatives, it can be used for co-housing, it can be used for community housing of the kind that Housing People Building Communities is involved in, and it can be used for community land trusts, which are similar but slightly different. The most important thing is that we find ways to unlock the energy that people wish to deploy and make it easy for them to do it rather than making it difficult to do it. In rural France, I'm speaking to you from rural Norfolk, but in rural France, local mayors provide service plots of land at roughly the same price as a cheap carpet, six euros per square metre, with the services already there, the electricity and the water, to encourage local families to stay in the area. In Berlin, building groups get together in what are called Genossenschaften, we call them housing cooperatives. And after the Berlin Wall came down in the late 80s, everyone thought Berlin would be the new capital of commerce for the East, and it was the gateway to the East. And a lot of local people said, well, actually, no, I don't think we do want the big headquarters of such and such a multinational on this piece of land. We'd like to build some houses on it, and then we'd like to live in them. Because Berlin, I lived there shortly after the wall came down. Berlin was a quite radical city because under the quadripartite agreement after the Second World War, you couldn't be conscripted for military service if you lived in Berlin, West Berlin. So a lot of people who didn't want to be forced to join the army, as everybody was in West Germany, went to live in Berlin. And so they had quite a lot of clout because there were a lot of them, and they got the support of the Berlin Senate, the local council, and they did quite a lot of these housing cooperatives, and they became significant in terms of the volume of housing that was provided. In Amsterdam, I should say, I spent a lot of time traveling in Germany and the Netherlands over the last few years. They take people off, the city of Amsterdam takes people off the statutory housing register and gives them access to a service plot of land on which to build a house for €40,000. And if they can't afford to buy it, which in many cases they can't, they're able to rent it at a peppercorn rent and then choose to buy it later if they want to. So there are lots of different solutions out there. We're just dancing around the edges in this country, but we're starting to make progress. And my sense, my very clear sense, is that it's organisations like Housing People Building Communities and many other organisations in different parts of the country where the energy that I was talking about, the Rod Hackney energy that needs to be unleashed, that is available, that is there, if only you don't underestimate it, and as long as you create structures that make it easy for it to happen, is starting to bubble up from lots of different places. And it will produce, I think, quite significant changes in how we do housing in this country, because we've plainly got to a point where we have a housing crisis. Now, the word crisis is often misused, and it's not true to say we have the same kind of crisis everywhere. There are parts of the country where people can buy a house for £5,000 because nobody wants to live there and there are no jobs there. But there are things you can do to move jobs to areas as well as moving everybody to big cities where most of the jobs are, and that's been proven. We were talking about the Prince of Wales a moment ago at his village in Poundbury, which is an urban extension of Dorchester, really. They've created over 1,200 dwellings and something like 2,000 jobs from scratch, local jobs, in the last 25 years that they've been doing the Poundbury project. They're ahead of schedule on the number of jobs that they have created. So the economic growth and the prosperity and the human flourishing that can go with new housing. And so often, of course, in the way that we currently do housing with our old model, doesn't actually happen. That needs to change. And I think we need much more bottom-up pressure to make that change. The other piece of good news is that the Community Housing Fund, which was launched by George Osborne in 2016, it was supposed to be a 5-year programme. It was very badly, how can I say this? It was not well handled for the first 18 months until the Treasury started listening to the people who actually knew what they were talking about at the Community Land Trust Network. And then it went like a train, did very well. And then it got closed, unfortunately, at the end of 2019. But it's now been reopened. It's not as much money as I would like to have seen yet, but my colleague Danny Kruger, who's a Wiltshire MP, has been campaigning very hard on this. And I do think that's another avenue that's going to grow. But I would draw people's attention particularly to the £100 million in the budget. It's paragraph 6.59 of the spending review, the blue document you can find if you Google spending review November 2020. Paragraph 6.59, bullet point 4, mentions the £100 million. And the Ministry of Housing has now said a significant amount of that will be used for self-build and custom house building. I'm expecting the Ministry of Housing to have a call for sites in the next few months. It's 1 year money that they want to spend between the 1st of April, which is not that far away, and the 31st of March next year. So if people want to put in bids for that, they need to keep their ears to the ground for when the announcement about bids being invited will be made. But this is, I think, just the beginning of something that could be much bigger. We really need to transform housing in this country so that we do it as if the people who are going to live in the houses are the people who matter most. Some of you will know Schumacher wrote a book called Small is Beautiful, Economics as If People Mattered was the subtitle. I want to create a way of doing housing in this country where we build houses as if people matter. And that's the first point, the kicking off point, the starting point, rather than a small number of very large companies telling people what they want. And then it turns out that most of them don't want it. And then we don't produce enough houses, which is the position we've got at the moment. I think I'll stop there. If that's all right.
Thank you very much. It's incredible work, because one thing I have recognized is that over the last, goodness, is it 20 years that I've been involved with this sort of self-build or community build, is that when I started, even though the rest of the world seemed to understand it and was promoting it, this country was a bit slow on the upkeep. So we desperately need people like you, Richard, to push for this, because we all know how valuable it is. So thank you very much for all that you're doing. And
you're very welcome. In fact, Shannon, may I say that what you've just said is an extremely important point, because there are people who think that what I'm advocating is odd. And I have a graph on a slideshow, I'm sorry I didn't bring these slides today, but which shows that actually we are the odd ones out. We are the outlier. In most of the developed world, self-commissioning of housing is somewhere between 40 and 60% of the total housing stock. In places like Austria, it's in the 70s and 80%. I had an email, one of my builders going through, from a lady in Yorkshire who said she and her husband had been looking for a piece of land for 5 years. And she said, it seems as if it will never be in this country as it is in Germany, a middle-aged rite of passage to get a piece of land and bring forward your own house. If you want to get a piece of land in Germany, you go along to your local council and you say, I'd like to buy a piece of land, please. And they say, I'm not making this up, they say, would you like a big one or a small one? And the small ones are proportionately slightly cheaper, and the big ones are proportionately slightly more expensive, so they subsidize the smaller ones, and everybody gets a hit. If you go to, there's a wonderful square in The Hague, which we visited recently, its name is on the tip of my tongue, where people were buying sometimes very small plots and sometimes considerably large ones, and you literally had a postman and a doctor and a lawyer living in this beautiful garden square together, where they'd embedded a children's playground in the area. It was just beautifully done, and every house was different, and they were different sizes because they were all done to the choice of the people who were going to live in them, and some of them were for affordable rent as well. So, you know, there's a lot more that we could be doing.
Fantastic. Liza, Brian, Richard, shall we open up for questions now?
Sure.
And hopefully we'll be able to at least answer them satisfactorily, if not perfectly.
Do you want me to summarize some of the questions that have come out through the chat?
That'd be good.
Yeah. Kath, I noticed you've got your hand raised. You want to start off that one you put right at the beginning around the sweat equity and linking that to how the developments work? Did she hear me? Kath? Oh, maybe she's gone.
Forgot to unmute, sorry. The sweat equity value that you allocate to the hours that people put in, is that genuinely that amount of saving to the cost of the scheme? And B, and this is maybe something for Liza, being project manager on the schemes, how is it actually managed on site? Because I could imagine, you know, you've got your contractor that's doing the main works, you've got people coming in doing their sweat equity work, but the contractor potentially saying, well, this hasn't happened right, or to time scale, etc., 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 because we've got a unique approach on this scheme. So how is that contract managed, I guess? And is the sweat equity value that you place on people's work actually equivalent to the savings that you make on the scheme?
A good question. I actually met with a prospective contractor for the Wigan project yesterday, and we were talking about the management of the sweat equity hours. It's a lot more organised, really, I think, than people probably think. I mean, you know, most of the home partners are working, and so it tended to be really with St Bernard's. The home partners can come on site Monday to Friday when the contractors are working on site, and they can join in, really, with whatever work happens to be going on. Again, it's more organised. You know, they do have to have all the health and safety, you know, inductions and you know, all of that, and the supervised. What tended to happen with St Bernard's and Old Street was that you would only get a few home partners on any one given day during the week coming and doing the sweat equity hours. A lot of their sweat equity hours were done on a Saturday in the big team builds that we had, which were very, you know, very well organised in terms of I would find out from the contractor what work needed doing on the Saturday. They'd be split into small groups and allocated tasks and be supervised. So the role of the contractor is absolutely key, and that was, you know, the discussion that I was having yesterday with the prospective contractor in Wigan. They've got to buy in to the model at the very beginning, you know, and with St Bernard's, although the contractor was directly employed, if you like, by Onward, HPBC were involved in the interview process, because Onward and ourselves realised, you know, the importance of the contractor having that buy-in, really. What we didn't want was a contractor coming along saying, oh yeah, you know, agree with all this sweat equity and the model, and then a month, 2 months into the build saying it's a bloody nuisance having home partners and volunteers on the site. You know, we can't deal with it. So it's careful management, but it's feasible. And in terms of the value, it's again it's a difficult one, really, to measure. The home partners sweat equity hours, they I must say, actually, not all of it is necessarily has to be on site and building, because we have had some of the home partners who've been pregnant, not able to work on a building site. We've had people with mobility issues. One of the home partners on Old Street had mobility issues, couldn't work on site, but was a qualified bookkeeper, and she supported the project by doing financial bookkeeping. And it is important to stress that, because otherwise it would only be available to people who were able-bodied, not pregnant, and able to work on site. So I'm not sure that I've answered that question very well, Catherine.
Could I just add something? Liza was being a bit humble when she talked about the good management and organization, because the entire model is based on kind of, obviously, with contractors that do the work that needs to be done by contractors, and recently overseen by contractors. But the entire model is based on an element of sweat equity, volunteers, team builds. Then the charity actually has its own PPE. We are geared up. Lisa's a trained site supervisor. So it's not simply an added extra. It is fundamental to the model. So we are geared up to be able to deal with all of the volunteers and know. And over the years, I mean, we've got a lot of experience under our belt now. We have a way of working with all of those volunteers to keep them safe, productive. And they are, with the right supervision, on a lot of the tasks, as efficient and with time as subcontractors. And a lot of volunteers will be absolutely committed to doing everything absolutely perfectly, so that when they walk away from the site, they can be proud and say, I did that, and someone's going to live in that house, and I'm really proud of what I've done, because it's something that is unique and fun for them. They're not just a job to be a bit sloppy with.
Yeah, but I think it's like what Liza said, though. Imagine working with a contractor that says all the right things, but they end up being quite litigious. It doesn't matter what the quality of those volunteers are. If something goes wrong, it's easy to end up passing the buck, because there are people working on the project that don't fall under the responsibility necessarily of the contractor. So I think it is really interesting, and I think it's quite interesting as well that it was a local contractor, a smaller firm, that actually worked on Kingsley Road, wasn't it, Lisa? Was it Hamptons or Hamilton's? I always forget the name, but
yeah,
they had the right attitude to work in that sort of environment and learn themselves through that process, I'm sure.
Yeah, and we're looking at a similar sort of contractor for Wigan. It's a family-run company that have already got a track record of genuinely supporting the communities that they've been building in. So
more social value again. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Can I bring in Neil? Neil McKenna, do you want to ask you a question around the new owners coming in, the model that's been talked about in Liverpool?
You mean in terms of the staircasing to 100% ownership? Yeah. I guess it's just reflecting on, I learned about, a similar model in Leeds just recently, where the initial homes were established in the same way, staircasing up to 100%. But I guess, sadly, what tends to happen is people do move on and sell their house, and it's kind of lost as an affordable house. So I guess just exploring trusts that can hold the freehold, as you suggested, Paul, in your response, and then the leasehold. So you do still have ownership and security, but that house remains in affordable ownership in perpetuity.
Yeah, so how does that work for HB, for your projects? How does that sort of build in?
To be honest, we haven't had very many people who have sold, you know, have wanted to move on once they've 100% staircased out. We have had a couple of the home partners who hadn't 100% staircased out, who have moved on. There was a clause in the lease agreement, which meant that HPBC or the RP has first choice on purchasing the house back from the home partner, and the one house on Kingsley Rd that was sold, which was after 8 years, and the chap was moving abroad. HPBC didn't purchase the house. It was 50% shared ownership. We didn't purchase the house. What we did do was we invited people on our waiting list to apply, and it was bought again on a shared ownership basis. Obviously there wasn't the sweat equity aspect involved, but it was still shared ownership. So I don't know, Brian, do you want to add anything to that?
Only it's very difficult to, if you look at what the explanation is, what is affordability? I mean, you could be here all day. There's a great deal of misunderstanding, I think, of what affordability is. That what we're finding, and I think what we'll find as we go through, particularly in the Granby Toxteth area, if a house comes up for sale, it's going to be, and they are required for us to, as a charity, to put a valuation on it, use our own valuers to do it. That becomes become a market value, but at the same time, it's what people can afford. And I don't think we're ever going to find on that particular estate that if a house comes up for sale, a gentrification starts to happen. The system and the area will sort of determine what the value of property is in and around that. So there's an element of market cost that will come into it. It's very difficult. I mean, I think if we look at the overall model, and I know through the hub, we've got to look very closely at the CLT models, the co-housing models, whatever other model comes up. But when you come underneath that particular legal aspect of ownership or control of the land, everything that we're talking about, all the donors, the volunteers or whatever, these houses have to be built. And if we can keep the cost of build down by getting donations, by getting help and that, then that in a way is keeping the cost of the house down. And I think market forces will tend to take over. There's also the opportunity that if the land is donated and we as a charity hold the freehold, then whether the house people have got 100% staircased out, we potentially still have the freehold of those houses that we can decide whether we want to offer it to the person who's staircased out or retain it. So it's something that I think Shannon has been involved in it for much longer than I have, in the way the model has been put together and it would work. There's no particular model that is perfect, but what I think we would argue, and what I hope we've been trying to show today on what HPBC's model is about, if you take out the legal side of it, we've all got the same problems. We've all got to build houses. We've all got to maintain them. And I think what we've been doing can demonstrate that this is possible. And with all the community, local areas that will provide donations and volunteer, you can keep the cost of build down to a very small minimum that then enables the home partners to take out a mortgage or rental that is affordable to them. So there's no, I don't think there's one answer to all of that. And I don't think we can say that one model is perfect. Let's see in 10, 15 years or whatever, how the CLT and the co-housing models work out. I don't know.
Just building on that, Olivia, do you want to ask you a question about mortgages? You were talking about potential home partners and how they get their mortgages. Or has she just gone?
I just wondered whether, like with a lot of community projects, ethical banks are more likely to lend, whether with a sweat equity mortgage there are specific lenders that are more understanding of this, and whether in a group self-build they all kind of go the same mortgage lender, or if it's an individual thing.
Okay. Actually, it's been some of the bigger mortgage lenders, high street mortgage lenders, that have provided mortgages for the houses on Kingsley Road, Holt Street, and St Bernard's. We have an independent financial advisor that advises the home partners, and I guess holds their hands really through the mortgage application process. What tends to happen with a development is a mortgage lender will only offer mortgages on a percentage of the overall project, because with new builds they don't want to take the risk of offering more than, and I think I'm racking my brains now, 20 around about 20%, 25% is the maximum that any one mortgage lender will offer on an overall project. So it's not been easy. It's something that we are working on with other mortgage lenders to try and get more on board. I think it's the combination of shared ownership and sweat equity that has caused some mortgage lenders to get a bit sort of difficult, if you like. But we've worked with 4 different mortgage lenders to date, and we've got hopefully another few that will come on board for the Wigan project.
Okay.
I just add that we had some great support from the head of mortgages that we met with at the same conference that we met Richard at, and I'm just trying to, but my sometimers disease, his name just escaped me. But when we mentioned to him, and I was quite pleased, thinking we had such a unique model, and that sweat equity was something that nobody had ever heard of in this country. And I think his name was was it Stephen?
Stephen Noakes.
Yeah, Stephen Noakes. Stephen looked at me and smiled and said, actually, we've had sweat equity in this country since the 50s. It's nothing new. So although the way that we are using sweat equity might be slightly different and unique, the concept of sweat equity isn't new in this country, and banks have been accepting it for decades. So it made me feel less unique, but in a way it was quite a good thing to hear.
Okay, brilliant.
Can I just add one point, if I may, Paul? Actually, two, because Stephen Noakes used to be at Cheltenham Gloucester, where he was head of mortgages, and then became head of mortgages at Lloyds Bank when they got taken over. And when my bill was going through, everywhere I went, every panel I ended up on, Stephen was there as well. He's been a huge supporter. and one of his colleagues, a young man called Ranil Jayawardena, is now an MP in Hampshire, who actually worked with Stephen at Lloyds Bank before he was elected to Parliament. What I was going to say was, there is movement afoot in finance. So I'm picking up on something Lisa just said about the percentage, because of course people, banks and building societies don't want to lend 100%. People will be familiar with Help to Buy, which was launched in 2013 after the financial crash, because people were having such difficulty getting the deposit together. And this was, of course, manna to the ears of the volume house builders, because it made it cheaper using your taxes to subsidise their small, not very well built, not particularly environmentally friendly products, while keeping the price up. And for 7 years, I've been saying to government, why aren't you doing this for people who want to develop their own schemes and bring forward their own projects? And I managed to get it into the Conservative manifesto on page 31 in the December 2019 election, where there is a paragraph that talks about community housing and extending Help to Buy to people who want to build their own houses. In the same paragraph, although they're two separate things, they were put in together to increase the chances that they survive the editing process. And in the Chancellor's Spending Review on the 25th of November, I've just asked my assistant to share that with you so that you get that paragraph. There is a specific reference not only to the £100 million I mentioned earlier, but to £2.2 billion, some of which, I'm sorry to say not all of which, but some of which will be going to what we're calling Help to Build. And it's being created right now. But instead of, as with Help to Buy, where the 20% difference that you can't afford to get a big enough deposit goes to the house builder, in this case, that 20% will go to the lender, so that the exposure of the lender is down to a level that they're comfortable with. And it has the advantage of being a subsidy for supply rather than a subsidy for demand, which is what Help to Buy is. So with any luck, we expect, it's being crafted as we speak, with the help of Andrew Bagley-Chappell, who was the head of mortgage products at Nationwide and is now the chief executive of the National Custom Self-Build Association. He's also heavily involved in the Right to Build task force. And he is talking to the Treasury and the Ministry of Housing about this right now. And I wouldn't be completely astonished, I have no inside information, by the way, that something is mentioned about it in the budget next week. If not, I'm expecting it will be announced fairly soon. And I'm expecting then, with the pressure which we will continue to apply, that it will grow to the point where I hope it will become relatively normal and mainstream.
Fantastic, thanks for that, Richard. Angela, I know you made a few comments in the chat. I don't know if you want to ask any question before I bring in Catherine. You were talking about the Church of England Land Commission that's recently reported, and
yeah, I mean, I think that report is, is really encouraging in the way that it actually brings together the aspirations of community-led housing groups and the church, and sort of recognizing the fact that that the church is everywhere, that if we sort of mobilize people from grassroots level and actually be able to kind of do some innovative things with with the land and the assets of the church, that their core values align so brilliantly with what a lot of the community groups are doing. So I kind of see that as being a great alignment, and this kind of webinar just kind of brings together all the aspects really of what that can actually do when all those different partners work together with their different assets and interests. So I guess more of a comment.
No, but thank you. And Catherine, you wanted to know about how you become a home partner and the allocations.
Yeah, because obviously, I know we've had the discussion about affordability, what does it mean, etc., but you've got your target audience. How did you go about actually promoting and allocating the opportunity to be a home partner?
There's a selection process that people have to go through in terms of the marketing of it. I suppose with Old Street, it was sort of just general, some of the sort of local media, really, radio, you know, giving interviews to, you know, the Echo and various trade magazines and what have you, and a lot of it was word of mouth as well. With St Bernard's, we when we were gifted the church, and the architect did the design. Obviously, the church was going to be split down the middle. The houses were going to be back to back, and would only have front gardens. And there were a few people that were sort of saying to me, oh, you know, people might not be interested in homes where they've only got a front garden. So we put a survey on our website, and not being specific, because we weren't at that point allowed to talk about the fact that that church was being gifted to us. But in amongst the questions about what areas of Liverpool would you be interested in, you know, buying a house in, and how many bedrooms and blah, 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 there was a sneaky question about would you be interested in purchasing, you know, a house that's only got a front garden. Within the first 2 weeks, there were over 80 people got in touch saying they wanted to apply. And at that point, we hadn't even said what area in Liverpool we were going to be, you know, doing the project in. And there was, you know, interest from the local media, who said, when they were interviewing me, do you want me to say at the end, if anybody's interested, please get in touch with you? And I was sort of like, oh, no, we're absolutely inundated. You know, there's only going to be 16 homes. We've already got 80 odd people wanting to apply. But throughout the build, there were constantly people getting in touch saying, have you got any more houses available? So actually, there wasn't much marketing needed at all. You know, there was a lot, like I say, of people who applied who lived locally, and just saw that there was a bit of movement going on, and there were friends and family members associated with, you know, the home partners on Old Street and Kingsley Rd and what have you. There is a family selection process. Initially, anybody wanting to apply needs to meet with the independent financial advisor. What we don't want is people to go through the process, get the hopes up, and find out that they're not able to get a mortgage for the minimum 30% shared ownership. So they meet with the financial advisor. There have been some who have, the problem has been around a poor credit score, and he's actually advised them on how they can improve that credit score over, you know, a 3-6 month period. You go through the financial assessment, obviously meet with myself, you know, and we have a good chat about what the project's all about. But then we've got a family selection committee, and that includes some of the home partners. So some of the Kingsley Rd home partners were involved in the Alt Street selection. Some of the Alt Street have been involved in the St Bernard's selection. We also have on that panel a mortgage advisor who's not there to give mortgage advice, but, you know, can sort of answer questions around the mortgage application process, and somebody who works in healthcare. So the family selection committee, it's only 2 of the committee will meet with the applicant, talk through the ethos, the values, talk about how they are going to manage doing the 500 hours of sweat equity, and yeah, generally, you know, about the diverse community and you know, being a part of that. The Family Selection Committee then write a report which goes to the Board of Trustees. It's not it's not a painful process, but it's necessary. You know, we, as I say, we need to know that the applicants can afford the minimum shared ownership mortgage, and that really that they are committed to the whole ethos.
Good. The criteria, I mean, when the charity first started and we first started breaking ground, there was a lot of there were some challenges in the Granby Toxteth area, L8, amongst some of the African communities, etc. And a lot of people said, oh, this is just for asylum seekers. It's like, no, oh, the criteria is you have to be a Somali. And it was like, no, the criteria is simply that you need to be living or working within a project area. You've got to be willing to partner with housing people, building communities, and willing to put in the sweat equity and building up a diverse and supportive, loving community. And with ability to get a shared ownership mortgage. And finally, in order, if we have more than one applicant, to look at the housing need. That could be overcrowding, living with parents. A lot of houses and rental properties aren't fit for living in. So but there is no cultural age, there's no criteria like that. It's simply you've got to be willing to come in and be part of the ethos of this model.
Okay, well, on that point, we're coming up to 12:30. We've just hit 12:30 now, so I'm going to wrap it up. I'd just like to say that was fantastic. Really appreciate hearing the detail of what you've been doing and just seeing the buildings. You know, I remember when I first met you, Brian, going out and having a look and just driving past during COVID. But it was, yeah, it's very inspiring what you're doing, and it's a great different model, different approach and delivering, and that's been fantastic. And Richard, it's great to meet you, but I think what you've put in place, and you know, this is what politics is all about, actually making things happen and making change, and it is very inspiring. And we will share as the hub the detail of that fund that Rich has been talking about that has now been put into place. So we will make sure that we are ready from Liverpool to get some of that resource into our region, which is fantastic. Really appreciate the conversation, the contributions. Thank you very much. The sun is still glorious here in the north. It's glorious. And I hope it is where you are too. So have a great afternoon.
Fabulous. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Brilliant.
Thank you.
Bye now.
Paul, will you share the chat with us?
And the film, yes.
Thank
and
you.
the link. Yes, definitely. Definitely.